Hey, 7th and 8th grade. So for history today, we are moving to 1942 and the events from World War II that happened that year. So yesterday we talked about the attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii that happened on December 7th, 1942. December 8th, the US declared war on Japan, and December 10th, Germany and Hitler declared war on the United States. So the United States was officially in the war. So in January of 1942, a guy named Reinhard Heydrich, that sounds like a scary Nazi name, doesn't it? And that's exactly what he was, a scary Nazi. So Reinhard Heydrich was in charge of figuring out what to do with the Jewish people. Sounds pretty bad, and it was. So Hitler, remember, in Mein Kampf said that the Jews were the reason for all of Germany's problems. He said a lot of crazy things about them, and he wanted to get rid of them from Europe. He called it the Jewish problem. So when you have a problem, you've got to find a solution. So that's exactly what they called it, the final solution to the Jewish problem. And Reinhard Heydrich's job was to find the solution. So he sat around and came up with a plan to round up every Jew, starting with Germany and then the rest of Europe. He was going to round up every Jew that they could find, put them on trains, and ship them to specially built concentration camps where they could either work and support the Reich and support Hitler, or they would be sent to be murdered in massive numbers. So some were allowed to live and work for the Reich, but their conditions were absolutely deplorable, and most of them died from starvation or from diseases because the conditions in the camps were so bad. The rest of them were immediately killed in gas chambers. So January 20th, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich got a meeting together of 15 important people in the Reich who would need to be working together to make all of this happen. And they met in a place called Wannsee, W-A-N-N-S-E-E. But remember, Germans pronounce W's with a V sound, so we say Wannsee. So it was called the Wannsee Conference, and the decisions that they made there were called the Wannsee Protocols. So you can look that up if you're curious about it. But they basically laid out the plan and said, you're in charge of rounding, and said the head of the Gestapo was in charge of rounding the Jews up. They had one person who was in charge of the train system. They had one person who was in charge of building the camps. All of these people were together in one room, and their sole purpose was figuring out how to completely eradicate the Jewish race. So that was January 1942. By June, their plans had all come to fruition, and they had built the concentration camp known as Auschwitz, which became infamous by the end of the war for being the deadliest of all Nazi concentration camps. Auschwitz was pretty much a death factory. The next month, the concentration camp Treblinka was opened in Poland, and Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto, Warsaw is the capital of Poland, they separated Jews in Warsaw and built a wall around the area for them to live in. They called it the Warsaw Ghetto, and Jews were not allowed out. That's how they kept them all together. At one point, there were 460,000 Jews who lived in a really small area, and it ended up being averaging it that 9 people lived in one room in these apartments in the Warsaw Ghetto. Conditions were terrible. People were starving. They weren't really able to get food in. So by July of 1942, they sent over 250,000 Jews to Treblinka just to be killed. There are many terrible events in world history, but none really come close to what happened during World War II in Nazi Germany. The next thing I'm going to tell you about is a dark part of American history. So we hear about the concentration camps that the Nazis opened In the United States, we also had internment camps. They weren't the same at all as the Nazi camps. There were no death factories, and that was not the point. It came from fear. And fear prompts people to do things that they wouldn't do normally. And that's exactly what happened in the United States after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So the United States had just been attacked by Japan, and people looked around and saw Japanese Americans, and they were afraid that they were going to attack them from within. So out of that fear, they decided to round up every Japanese American, everyone living in America of Japanese descent, round them up, and they sent them to internment camps. They relocated them from their homes to these camps, and the Japanese had no time, so they sold their houses, they sold all of their stuff, and because there was so little time, they sold it for whatever they could get, and they often lost a lot of money because of that. They were sent to these camps until the war ended, so they were there for 2 or 3 years. I'm going to link to some more videos so you get more information about the Wannsee Conference and about Japanese internment. So watch those, and I want you to continue with your history research project. Some of you text me, and I know a few of you are doing the Battle of Midway. That's a great one, but there are a lot of other events that happened between 1942 and 1945. So if you want to research one of the things that I talked about today, that's great as well. Just check with me first before you get started and let me know what you decide.